guys, and welcome to another episode of the Work.knits podcast. Blimey, does it feel like a hot minute since I was last talking to you. Whoa. Hot minute in multiple ways. We are still experiencing a heat wave here in the UK, so I'm going to do the usual and apologise for the lack of makeup, the lack of brushing my hair, just the lack of general tidiness when it comes to my personal appearance. There was absolutely no point putting any foundation on or trying to tame the frizz in my hair given the heat today. So as usual, you're getting me very au naturel. I hope that you guys are sitting comfortably. I hope you've got something nice to drink, maybe a snack, you're knitting. There's a lot to talk about today, which is really exciting. So before we even get started, I want to say I've got the windows open. I'm going to try and edit out background noise as much as possible, but I'm sorry if you hear the odd vehicle going past or a train or whatever. The second thing I want to say up front is thank you so much to everybody who has liked, commented, watched my videos on the last episode, since the last episode, and those who have subscribed, because we are getting so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and that is so exciting, and I'm just so grateful to all of you for engaging with my channel and this space. I really hope it's as much a safe space for you to come and enjoy craft and chatting about craft as it is for me. So, getting into the nitty-gritty, if you'll excuse the pun. What am I wearing today? I am wearing my Tip Top Tank by Emily Baldwin, or I think it's the Maker's store. This is something I knit up a few months ago. It's new this year to my wardrobe. It's quite low cut. I know not everybody would want to knit a version that maybe shows off the décolletage in this way, but for me today in this temperature it's perfect. This is knit up in DK weight yarn, and I think it's the trio base from Raglan. It's a cotton silk wool blend. I can't remember the colour name. If I can, I'll put it down below in the description box. I made multiple modifications to this pattern. I talk about that in a previous episode, so I will try and dig out which one that is and link it below. But yeah, love this top. Very handy for days like this. Okay, so what have we got in store today? I thought I would talk to you about the classic finished objects, works in progress, but then I thought I'd also talk to you about my to frog list, and I thought it might be fun to go through why I am cutting off some of these projects and just deciding to use the yarn for other things or just put it back in stash. I'm going to dive straight in with finished objects, I think, after a sip of an iced coffee, which is much needed. You can probably see how warm I am. Okay. So I've got a little stack of finished objects this week. None of them are quite finished in the sense of like ready to hang in my wardrobe. Some have got ends left to weave in, and some have got some seaming left. But the reason I'm counting them as a finished object is that was not the weaving the ends bit in, that was not an intentional move, but the one that needs seaming, I thought it'd just be easier to show you on the podcast without it being seamed. All will become apparent in a moment. So last episode I mentioned that I had picked up a long-term whip. This had been languishing purely because I didn't think I had enough yarn to finish the body. I thought it was going to be too short. And so I just picked it up the other day and thought, why don't I just knit the rest of the yarn I've got left and just see? So that's what I did. And here we go, guys. So this is loosely based off the Pieces of Silver sweater by Vera Valimaki. It is a raglan construction. You can see here the Piece of Silver sweater has a really gorgeous, quite wide set of raglan stitches on the 4 points, which I think is a really nice detail, and I just really like the fit of it. This is meant to be kind of not like a negative ease or zero ease sweater, but it's meant to be like maybe 1 inch. It's meant to just kind of skim your body, and yeah, but it's not supposed to be baggy, so to speak. So I cast this on earlier this year. The dark blue is Lang Yarn's Jowl Sock in the colour dark navy, and excuse me, and then the goldy colour is 2 yarns held together. One is Malabrigo Unicorn Tails, which is what they call their little mini skeins. Unicorn Tails, which are merino singles, and this in the shade Burnt Caramel, I want to say. Something like that. And then I've held it with a strand of Ito Yarns silk thread in like their golden caramelly colour too. So I think I really like it. I'm really happy with it. I had in my head wanted a bit more of the dark blue after I finished the stripes. On the other hand, I really wanted to use up all of that unicorn tail. So it's like, yeah. Anyway, so I've literally used every single scrap of the blue. I just need to weave in those tails. And I think some of the finishing details on this are quite interesting. So I'm going to scoot forwards just to show you. So the neckline, so the whole top is knit on the main body of the top is knit on 3.75mm needles. I then picked up, so I cast on below what would be normally the ribbing, knit the yoke, etc. And then I went back in and picked up the collar, and I picked up the collar on 3mm needles and did a folded neckband. And a detail that I tried out this time was to knit, let's just say 5 rows, plain stockinette, do a row where I decreased the stitch number by like, I just decreased maybe like, let's say 10 stitches around the whole neck, or maybe a bit less, 8 stitches. And then I did a single plain round of stockinette, and then I did a row where I re-increased those 8 stitches, or 10 stitches, however many it was, and then knit another 5 rows. And then when you fold it over, what that does is it means that the row that sits on the innermost part of your neck is actually smaller than the circumference at the outer part, because what I tend to find with these folded necklines is they kind of stand up a bit, and this one is still doing it, but just not quite as much. But do you know what I mean? Sometimes they kind of stick straight up rather than following the curve of your neck. So that's quite a sweet detail. I think the other detail that's worked well is I did the raglan increases, and then I knit the armholes straight for a bit before joining in the round for the body. I knit both sides of the body straight for a bit before, and flat, before joining again for the body, just to really open up that armhole. And then what I've done is gone in with a 3mm crochet hook, and I have single crocheted a number of stitches into, we've got a train going past, a number of stitches in rounds around the armhole, and what that's done is kind of created structure around that armhole without cinching in too much, and I think it's generated a really nice shape. And I'm not a very good crocheter. I literally know the basic single crochet stitch, and what I always do is I only go through if the crochet stitch looks like a V, if it's sat flat, I always crochet just through the leg or the arm of the stitch that is furthest away from me, so the front one is always then left. And what that does is, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on camera, probably not, I don't know, let me try and insert a picture, but what it does is it creates almost like horizontal rows of little bars. It's really pretty, I think. So yes, and then I think down the sides it looks like, although I knit this quite a while ago and didn't make very good notes on this, but it looks like at a certain point I've done some decreases for some waist shaping. I don't know if you can see that when I'm holding it like this. And then the bottom I finished off again with that crochet stitch, which I think has worked really well. I could, now that crochet stitch has worked so well, I could go back in and redo the neckline with it, but actually I think I'm quite happy. And I tried this on before blocking, and it was way too cropped. Now that I've blocked it, if I just stand up a bit, it falls right on top of my waistline, which I think is perfect. So very happy with this. So I just need to weave in those ends, and then that is all done. First finished object, guys. That is promptly going on the floor. My next finished object is something that you saw in the last episode, and I absolutely cracked through this. I really enjoyed this project, which comes as a bit of a surprise because I have tried to knit a different version of it before, and I thoroughly did not enjoy it. So who knows? The project I'm talking about is the Shift Cowl by Andrea Mowry. This is now going to have a big crease in it where I folded it, but this is the one that I haven't seamed yet because I thought it'd be easier to show you like this. Da, da, da. So I cast this on. I think I had cast it on by the time I last spoke to you, and I finished this last weekend, so it took me 1 week to do. And what do I want to say about this? So you will see in my frog pile later, that I tried or started to knit the Andrew Mary shift shawl previously, and I'll go into more detail later, but I really didn't enjoy that, and I think it's because the slip stitch and the mosaic is quite repetitive. This cowl I knit up on quite thick yarn and on quite big needles, and I think that's why I enjoyed it, whereas the last one I kind of was modifying the pattern to use fingering weight yarn because that's what I had, and I think that's why it felt like it went so slowly and I didn't enjoy it. So big lesson learnt there. I think I prefer mosaic knitting when it's on bigger needles because it feels like it moves quicker. But anyway, the shift cowl, in terms of what I knit this up in, I think I used 4.5mm needles, which is bigger than what the pattern calls for, but I did quite a lot of colour management and I kind of slightly modified the yarns I used, so compared to what's recommended. So the pattern recommends 3 yarns at kind of sport DK weight, I think, and it's not revealing anything about the paid for pattern in detail, but basically you change between those 3 yarns, and I didn't follow those changes to the letter. I used up more of one yarn than was recommended, so I kind of treated one yarn as almost like my base yarn, and that yarn was Sadness Garn Peer Gynt. Let me get you the tag so I can talk about the colourway and stuff, but it will be in the notes below. So I used Sadness Garn Peer Gynt Tweedy in the colour 1035, and this is like a grey with tweedy flecks of mustard and almost like a kind of aubergine purple colour. For those in the US, eggplant, like purpley colour. And I used that throughout. Now that is, sorry, I keep throwing back to the tag. I think this is quite a thick, I don't know if I'd necessarily call this DK, but I also wouldn't necessarily call it worsted, but it's, or maybe I would, it's 91 metres per 50 grams, so it's quite thick. And I was holding that with, or working that with, then a Shopple Crazy Zabbable, 50 grams in the colourway 2299. And these, I don't know if they're going to have the information on these tags, let's have a look. Yeah, so these are, oh interesting. Yeah, this is saying 150 metres per 50 grams is what this is saying in terms of length. So that was my contrast colour, and then another contrast colour was the colourway Absolute Zero in the Spin Cycle Dyed in the Wool, which is sport weight. So I was using 3 quite different weights of yarn. As I say, I used the Peer Gynt as kind of like a main colour, and that's why I went up a needle size, because that's quite thick. Look at that drape. Oh, I think if we get a bit closer you can kind of see a little bit more. So yeah, the background light grey is the Peer Gynt. I then did quite a lot of colour management on the 2 contrasting yarns. So my particular skein of the Spin Cycle had lots of like light purpley lilac-y colours, some blues, and then it had some quite hot pink Barbie purpley colours, and I took those out because I wanted this to be much more like cool tones. Likewise, the Zabbable had like some quite bright red sections and bright orange, which are absolutely beautiful, and I've saved them for another project, but again they weren't quite right. The one exception was there was a bit of red in the Zabbable that I kind of kept in because it formed part of the fade. Now I think when I look at this in person I'm not particularly obsessed with the red, but when I look at it overall I'm happy with it, if that makes any sense. So yes, really enjoyed this. I just need to now seam this here, and then it will be a lovely cowl necky thing. I haven't decided if this is going to stay in my wardrobe or if I'm going to gift this at Christmas. I don't know yet, to be decided, guys. But you know, I don't normally wear purple, but I'm quite happy with how the purple's gone with the grey. So let's just see. So that is my second finished object. Obviously I will just seam this. It's been blocked, I will just seam it now to get it ready for wearing. Coffee. I feel like I'm talking quite fast, and despite the fact I came on here thinking they all know me by now. They all know that, you know, this is not a beauty podcast. I'm feeling very self-conscious of how warm I am and the lack of makeup, so sorry if I'm exhibiting that anxiety in different ways. Right, the next thing I wanted to show you, again, doesn't have the ends woven in, and this is the start of quite a nice theme for this week. So I have a colleague at work who is having a baby, and they are aware that I knit, and they have family connections to knitters, as in there are sorry, that was a weird way of saying it, there are knitters in their family, and so they really appreciate hand knit items. And I went in and just asked if they were planning particular colour schemes for the baby stuff or what their plans were, and the answer was not really, trying to avoid anything that's kind of too one way or the other, in terms of kind of stereotypical boy or girl colours, and I just said, look, I would really love to knit you some things. So this was the end of last week, so whereas last week was focused all on that shift cowl, finishing that top off, I actually thought that I was going to pick up some of my other whips and just clear the decks. But then I got really hooked on this idea of baby knits, and I don't know if you guys can see, but I have sorted my stash into these kind of grey felt boxes stacked up the wall to kind of get that, because I love having my yarn on the wall, I love being able to see it. I couldn't really see it down in these cubbies. I do still have my skeins down here, but all the balls are all up on the wall. And I've been looking at it, and there are some that are just such small quantities, and they're not really, like, they're all like different weights, and I just thought, how on earth am I going to use these? Anyway, I got hooked on this idea of baby knits. So the first thing I did was picked up these two scraps from my stash. Sorry, you can still see I haven't woven in that tail, but I picked up these two scraps. So this bottom yarn is like Iliani or Iliami. It's a beautiful luxury yarn. Someone bought me one skein of it 7 or 8 years ago as a birthday present, and it was a real kind of like, I think it's got yak in it, I think it's got some cashmere or some silk. It's absolutely stunning, so drapey, and I had got like a nugget about this much left. It was the year that everyone was making the honeycomb cowl, that like slip stitch cowl, so I made one for myself. I kind of wish I'd used the full amount of yarn, but I was still transitioning into using these knitting patterns and stuff. You know, this was a real transition year for me. So anyway, I had this nugget left over. Now, what I had completely forgotten until I started knitting this hat was that I had not got a ball winder or a swift at the time, and this yarn came in a skein, and it's really slippery and like silky and gorgeous, but that meant that I'd had an absolute nightmare trying to wind it into a ball, and I think it had knotted, and I'd ended up cutting the yarn and then just splicing it together. That meant this little nugget that was left over had about 1 million knots in it and like start-stops, which was terrible for a small project like a hat. Like, I honestly think there must have been, let's have a count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was 5 ends to weave and knots to weave in and sort in that much knitting, as well as the beginning and end of that section, if that makes any sense. Like, in between here and here, there was 5 ends. Crazy. And then, so I pulled that out of stash, and then the other bit I pulled out of stash is this orange. This, I believe, is a King Cole DK alpaca yarn, and I bought a huge quantity of this to make the Carbeth cardigan by Kate Davies, when that was the huge thing. And at the time, I bought some 6.5mm needles to knit that, and I just didn't know enough about knitting for it. I know it's quite a beginner cardigan, but I was kind of doing this all on my own, working it all out, and anyway, and I also didn't, I think I learned after the fact that alpaca grows, and so that just, anyway, so I paused that whole project, so I've got quite a lot of that in my stash. So what did I knit? I've knit a Pearl Soho, what was meant to be a ribbed beanie pattern, and I think the theme is, these baby knits, the real perfectionist has come out in me, and it's not that my colleague is going to judge me at all. Like, they will just love that I've made them something. But I think knowing they have knitters in the family, I really want to put my best foot forwards, because if those knitters are looking at my work, I kind of, if I know there are errors in it, they're going to see them. Does that make any sense? And I think because I've been tired, there have been errors in it. And normally I just be like, no one else is going to notice. but I'm being a perfectionist about it. So this hat, I re-knit this section about 3 or 4 times. I'm still not happy with it. I'm still not happy with the hat overall. This was loosely based off a ribbed hat by Pearl Soho. I decided I didn't want to make the whole thing in rib. That was an error. Because I just don't like the way this looks. And then I re-knit the length of the rib because I want it to be like a turn up, but then I didn't want to knit like this much rib because I wasn't sure how much yarn I had. So it was just like a perfect storm in a teacup really. Loads of ends, not knowing how far my yarn would go, not being clear on the design in my head, and just like over perfectionist. So anyway, so now I've got this tiny little hat that I'm not happy with. So it's kind of a finished object, but I think it's going to go in a kind of box, and I probably will gift it to someone, but just probably not someone with a knitter in the family. And you know what, yeah, that's perfectionist and yeah, that's silly, but that's just the way I feel. So I'm going with it. So it's a finished object that just has one final end to weave in, yeah, it won't be going anywhere. I think I knit this hat on 3.75mm needles. I think the pattern called for 3.25mm, but I am increasingly finding and realising over the years that my gauge differs so much from continental style knitters, and I know the Pearl Soho patterns before. When I've knit them on the recommended needles, I've ended up way too tight, so I just took a bit of a gamble. I think the size wise it's turned out perfectly. This is meant to be the kind of 0 to 6 month size, and I think when you turn up the brim that's kind of perfect, but the yarn is just super drapey and stretchy, and I think that's probably not the best thing for a baby hat. But anyway, that's my next finished object, guys, and that starts my tangent on more baby knits. So let's have a sip and then get on to those. I feel like I'm talking so fast. You know that you guys can set the like replay speed setting, so you can slow me down if you prefer. So if we stick on the hat for the moment, this isn't really a work in progress, but it's going to be. So I'm going to knit another version of that hat by Pearl Soho, and I'm going to cast it on, and I'm going to follow the actual pattern to make it ribbed, and I'm going to use this light bluey purpley, it's like kind of ultraviolet, it's kind of amazing, this mini from John Arbon. It's a Knit by Numbers mini number 36, DK weight 25 grams, and I'm hoping that's going to be enough to do a little baby hat from that pattern. So you'll see that cast on, you'll probably see it on over on Insta. I think I'm going to have gifted all this stuff before the next podcast episode, so you might not see the physical finished product, but yeah, that's my plan. Reknit that hat in the DK mini. And then I have cast on a little sweater, and I'm still being a perfectionist about this too. So this is probably going to have, this I have redone bits already, but there is going to be more that's going to be redone. But anyway, let's show you where I'm up to. So we've knit most of the body, we're on the bottom ribbing. The bottom ribbing is going to be ripped back, and I'm going to do it on a smaller needle size. I was knitting it on the same needle size as the main body. Quite often for my own garments I don't go down a needle size for ribbing, but actually I was thinking on this because I kind of want it to be comfortable around baby's torso and around the waistline, but actually it needs to stay down, so I think we need some tighter ribbing. So I'm going to rip back on the ribbing. I also ended up dropping down stitches to reorganise cabled sections down the side on the train, which was horrific, if I'm honest. That was such a bad idea. It had me literally sweating with anxiety. So I have got, you can just see down the side here, I've got a very, very simple twist. It's not like a plait, it's a, and I can share it because I've just taken it from a Stitch Dictionary, very old one, and I use this all the time. It's a 4-stitch cable where you always cable 4 forward. So you're taking your first 2 stitches, putting them on hold, knitting the next 2, then putting those 2 stitches that have been on hold back onto your needle and knitting those, and you always do it that way round, so it's just a twist the whole way along. But originally, I don't always love having my cables on reverse stockinette fabric. Oh, we've got dogs in the background now. All the people joining the podcast today. I don't always love putting my cables on a reverse stockinette stitch background. I don't always think it's necessary. I think there's a subtlety to having them on a normal plain stockinette background. So I started this without the pearl stitch sections either side, but for some reason on the train I just suddenly went, oh my gosh, that cable's not going to pop if I don't put the pearl stitch to either side. And again, this comes back to me being a perfectionist and being very conscious that there is a knitter who might see this. So I went back and dropped down the entire panel and reinserted pearl stitches either side of the cable, and one of the cables didn't go quite right, so I had to drop down the cable itself and recable without a crochet hook, just using my needles on the train. That was a good challenge. I feel a lot more confident now dropping down stitch. I still don't know if I'd have the confidence to drop down stitches in a lace piece of work, but I do in cables now. That's good. We can do surgery now on cables. So you're probably all thinking, what is this pattern? I've actually used the Tin Can Knits Flax Light pattern, or numbers, for the start of the sweater. I have cast on below the collar line, and so I just need to pick that back up and do a ribbing for the neckline, which I will be doing probably this evening. That Flax Light sweater pattern is free and it's fantastic, so I really would recommend it. And the cables is just a little addition that I've put in. That's not in the pattern, but I think because this is a plain raglan sweater, very well written, very instructive, very educational, so fantastic, but it is a plain raglan, so it kind of allows you to customise things. The kind of slight modifications I've made, the pattern is for a fingering weight yarn. This yarn I think is DK, really. It's a light DK, but it is DK. The pattern calls for 3.75mm needles, and I am knitting it on 3.75. I'm knitting the first size, which is 0 to 6 months. I know because I'm knitting it in DK weight yarn with the recommended needles, I know it's going to come up slightly bigger than the pattern would call for. I don't think that's an issue because it means it will last the baby longer. The only other edit I made was, again, because it's a free pattern, I think it's fine for me to share. They tell you to keep working the raglan until X point, and then they say to just work plain rounds before you separate for the sleeves. I kept working raglan increases at that point because the sleeve was just looking too small. Now at the moment, the sleeve hole now looks quite big, granted, but I think it would be good if this sweater could fit over like a baby grow easily. This armhole will be cinched in when I add the sleeve, so I think it will be perfectly proportioned. Anyway, so very happy with it. I have knit the body to the length recommended. As I said, I'm going to go back in and redo this rib. This is currently knit on 3.75. I think I'm going to go down to a 3mm. I'll probably do the neckline ribbing on a 3mm. I'm going to do a folded neckline, and I'm going to put a piece of dressmaking elastic, it's called beading cord elastic, into the neckline. And then yeah, I'll knit the little sleeves, and then this will be done. I have been using my stitch marker that I picked up at the Oxford Yarn Store. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that. There we go. I've been using that to count my rows for my cable, and then to be able to count the number of rows for ribbing, and oh, what a relaxing knitting experience that is compared to before. I know it's such a simple thing to use a row counter, and I know lots of people already do it, but I haven't been, and oh, it's made so much of a difference, so I'm so delighted. And the very final thing I was going to mention about this baby sweater is I've been trying to knit these baby knits mainly from stash. However, for sweater quantities, I was really struggling to find something that I've got in the right quantity that is machine washable, because I do think that's important for the sweaters because you get spit up on them and all sorts. So I ended up popping down to my local kind of like hardware store, a bit random, but they do have some knitting supplies. Now, normally, I personally prefer to wear natural fibres, or as natural as I can, but what I really wanted was something that looked like wool but could be chucked in the washing machine, and what I found was King Cole's Big Value DK, and this is 100% acrylic, and actually it has felt like I'm knitting with wool, which is incredible. The colour variation on this, the kind of flecking, looks like wool. I'm just really impressed, and I think this is such a good option for so many sweaters, and I wish I'd found it previously, when maybe I didn't have the money to buy some of the yarns I wanted to, I wish I'd found this. This was £1.35 per ball. So this sweater has taken one ball so far, and I think I've just changed on to my second, and I won't use all of my second. So you're looking at a sweater for under £3. And I think that's amazing. Yes, there is environmental impact to plastic, but I think that is somewhat combated by the fact that you're making something from by hand, and this can be passed down from child to child. Like, this will not just be used once. This is not a fast fashion item. And so if by making it in acrylic means it will wash better and it will last longer and it's got that durability, I don't see the issue with that. So if anyone is looking for an alternative to wool for whatever reason, be it price point, be it you maybe have an allergy to wool, whatever it is, the King Cole Big Value range in DK, this is the colour, what's it going to say? Yeah, shade 4023 taupe, however you want to pronounce it. This looks like wool. I've had other knitters look at this and go, oh, what is that wool you're using? It's gorgeous. So it really is lovely, and I'd highly recommend. So that is my next whip, and we'll probably be finished hopefully this evening, tomorrow. That's when I'm hoping to get it done, but they're so quick, baby jumpers. So that is my first whip. Oh, I feel like I've been talking for ages. I feel like there's so much to cover today. Another train. I don't know if you guys can hear these. I think that when I used to record in a different location, you could hear them despite the window being closed. Whether or not you can hear them in here, whether the camera's clever enough to block them out, I don't know. We'll see when I edit this. Right, my only other whip to show you that I actually have worked on, because I put mohair on my nose. Right. The only other whip that I've actually done some work on, because, you know, like, I've got a cowl on the go that's got multiple different balls of yarn, loads of colour changing, needs a chart. I have not been working on that. There's my grink wrap, that is quite heavy, multiple balls, loads of mohair, can't be working on that. However, my hypocrisy is the other thing I have been working on and made huge progress on is a mohair jumper, and that is the one that links to this swatch that I showed you guys last time. Please ignore what I think is not particularly the nicest combination of light coloured mohair and dark green. This is not the colourway, the light mohair is not the colour that I'm using. But last time I showed you this swatch, and this swatch was for the George's sweater, and I am knitting the George's sweater. I'm knitting two of them for my bridesmaids for my wedding. And as a reminder, this is what the George's sweater looks like. It's a gorgeous plain fronted raglan with a deep V at the back that ties in a bow. And I'm knitting these for my bridesmaids to wear over the top of their dresses for our wedding, which is in November. So I have also discussed on the podcast knitting for olive yarns and different shades of green, and you guys have been incredibly helpful in helping me to get exactly the right shade. So earlier this week a gorgeous bag arrived full of Knitting for Olive slate green mohair and bottle green merino. Yeah, it's just their merino base. So I'm holding these two together. What's nice is this has got a more earthy tone to it, this has got a brightness to it, and when you combine the two you get a slight darkness and an earthiness from this, but you still get that vibrancy from the one in my right hand. So perfect combo, very happy. This gorgeous little parcel arrived full of them, and of course I had to cast on straight away. Based on my swatch, I've gone down to a 5mm needle, which is not what the pattern calls, well, it's what the pattern calls for, but it's not what gets me the gauge. So I don't think, I think I'm fine to share the gauge with you, because that should be something shared on Ravelry to help you pick your yarns, etc. So the gauge that they want is 15 stitches and 24 rows. I couldn't even achieve that on 6.5mm needles. I was still a stitch off, and that's challenging because that for me creates such an open fabric that I think that's going to have literally no structure whatsoever. That's just for me personally, my personal preference, whereas 5mm I was quite far off, but worked fine. So I've done a bit of maths, and I thought, if helpful, if you haven't done this before, I thought this might be helpful to explain how I do it. There may be better ways of doing it, but the way that I did this was to, and I've got it in a notebook, but I took, okay, how am I going to describe this? So, I measured my stitch gauge on this swatch at 5mm needles, and I figured out how many stitches in 4 inches or 10 centimetres. Let me get the notebook, guys, I think this is going to be easier. Okay, because I was gonna try and not use the actual numbers, but I think it's just going to get too tricky. So, using 5mm needles, I got 18 stitches per 10 centimetres and 8 rows. If you divide that so that you've got how many stitches per inch, I get 4.5 stitches per inch. If you take the sweater's gauge, which is 15 stitches per 4 inches, and you divide that so you get a per inch gauge, then you get 3.75 stitches. So we're looking at a 0.75 stitch difference per inch between what I'm getting and what the pattern wants. That might not sound like much, but when you then times that by the number of inches that go into the circumference of the sweater, that's a lot. So I then took the bust circumference of each of my bridesmaids, and I took the number of inches of their bust circumference, and I times it by the number of stitches I get per inch at my gauge. So I times their bust circumference by 4.5 stitches. That gave me the number of stitches that they will need at the widest point on their bust. I then looked in the pattern and found the section that refers to the widest point on their bust, which normally in a raglan pattern is basically you want to be looking at the point where you separate for the sleeves. Unless it's a quite tight art, like the sleeves on the raglan are quite tight and the raglan finishes above the bust line. But if you're looking at a raglan pattern with positive ease, where it's got quite a deep raglan, the likelihood is that the split is going to happen essentially in line with the widest point of your bust. I then I compared how many stitches I need from the bridesmaids with the different stitch counts for the different sizes in the pattern at that point. And from that, I know that I need to knit one sweater in the second size in the pattern and one sweater in the third. And the pattern recommends that if you're in between sizes, you go down. I have instead gone up because I'm doing this kind of bit of hokey pokey rejiggery. I don't want that to go wrong. I prefer them to be ever so slightly big than ever so slightly small, particularly given that the sweater ties at the back so you can kind of adjust the fit. So that is how I calculated what I'm doing. I have then cast on and knit. This is really hard to show. I've got so many balls of yarn coming off. This is what I've knit so far. Kind of looks like a bat. I'm at the point now where I need to separate the sleeve stitches off the needles, and then I'm assuming there will be some stitches under the arms I need to cast on, and then I will start still knitting flat but knitting the body section and shaping the V at the back. So my understanding is you kind of knit the sweater like a normal raglan, well, almost like a cardigan. You knit that all a normal and then you bind it off and then you pick up the bows at the back. I don't think, I'm pleased that's the way the pattern works because I don't want to make big bows for the back. I want to create small little ties, almost like the ties you get on the top of shoulders on a little cami top. So that's the plan, guys. So quite a lot of progress, and I think if it hadn't been for my baby knitting kick, I probably would have had the whole body on this done, to be honest. This is how much I've got left. I've wound the kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, the way that the balls are wound from Knitting for All Over and other companies, but they're kind of almost like a cake that's been squashed. They're kind of like, and I just found that they were jumping around when I was trying to knit. So I've wound them into balls, and this is what I've got left of my first 2 balls. So I've knit pretty much the entire yoke just with 2 balls. So, you know, I think think I'm going to have quite a lot of the yarn I've ordered left at the end, which is really nice because I might even have enough to knit myself on. Let's see. Maybe that's ambitious. Let's see. But it's exciting. So this is the Georgia sweater. I don't think I said who this was by. Bit of an error. This is by, her brand name is Calibri by Joanna. So yeah, and she wore this sweater at her wedding. So I think that's really lovely. So that's my other whip, guys. And the one thing I was going to show you was one of our like challenges is getting all these different, is to get the greens featured in the wedding to match. And I think I was chatting to you guys about the different shades from Knitting for Olive, and look, if I had more time and more money, I'd order all the different green shades, figure that out, but colour wise, send back what I don't need, but because I'm holding mohair with a merino, I'd need to really knit swatches, and then obviously you can't send the yarn back, so I just didn't have the money to be forking out on that and then having potentially balls of yarn that I wasn't going to use. So we've had to just go with it, and then we've had to just hope it will go with the other greens. Now this is looking incredibly shiny in this light, which is not at all how it looks in person. But anyway, this is the green for the suits for the groomsmen. So it's not a perfect match, but they don't clash, I don't think. It's looking different on camera to how it looks in person, and actually that's interesting for me to see because we're obviously going to have photos of the wedding and I don't want it to look like it clashes in photos. So that's interesting. But anyway, they are different. This has got more blue in it, but yeah, we're just going to have different shades of green, I think, because it is so hard getting the shades to match perfectly. So yes, very exciting. Wedding plans are moving forward along with so much knitting, which is great. So I'm going to take one more sip of coffee. That's it for finished objects and whips. If you are happy to leave things here, that's what you came for, then thank you so much, and I really hope you have a good couple of weeks. Thank you so much for all your support. If you like this video, please do give it a like, and leave a comment if you've got any feedback, and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and you can hit that little bell and it will alert you to any of my videos. If you are interested in hearing more about my to frog list, then stick around, because that's what we'll move on to now. Okay, got a big pile of knitting here that you might have already spied, and I'm just going to kind of pick things off the top, and I'm not going to go, I say I'm not going to go into loads of detail, let's just see, but my plan is not to go into loads of detail, but just to kind of give you a bit of a sense of some of the projects I'm frogging, in the hope that it's useful to people, and just figuring out how I assess things and what did or didn't go right. Maybe it's interesting, I don't know. So the first thing I'm going to frog is this triangle. This triangle is knit in Holst Garn Super Soft in the colourway Goldcrest. It's a colourway I really love, and for those who don't know, I was previously knitting on a manual Brother vintage knitting machine, items like scarves, shawls, cowls that I was selling at markets and online, and I keep most of that knitting very, very separate to this podcast. In fact, I don't really do it anymore. I don't, my knitting machine is packed away, and I haven't touched it in probably about a year. But because of that, there were some things that I was kind of sampling on there for that venture that that didn't work out. You know, part of this is like learning, and you have an idea for things, and then whether it does or doesn't work out. Anyway, this was one of those samples, and basically I was going to make 4 of these and join them together into a blanket, like a square baby blanket. But that didn't work out for multiple different reasons, long story. So I'm going to frog this so that I have the yarn to use. But what is super fascinating is stuff knit on the knitting machine is so much stretchier than stuff we hand knit. Go figure. I don't quite know how or why, because the machine knits it quite tight. But anyway, so that's going to get frogged. So that's going to be a whole load of more yarn that I can use for another project, which is very exciting. It's not been blocked yet, so it's still got all the oil in it. And yeah, I think this would be beautiful in like a pair of mittens with a white yarn. I think that'd be fab. The next thing that I am going to frog, or partially frog actually, eek. There we go. The next thing I'm partially frogging is this. This is this lighter colour is Nougat in the Holst Garn Super Soft. I am going to frog that Nougat section colour all the way back to here. This panel is knit in Positive Ease yarns in the colourway Jolene. I don't know if it's going to focus on the cable, but it's beautiful. This is the same construction as my new From Farm to City shawl. I will come on to pattern release in a moment, but yeah, this is the same construction. And but for this one, I think I just got I got the decreases on this side really wrong. I wanted it to be really wide, but I think this is just too long for one side of a shawl, and it's too thin for too long. So I'm going to frog that, but I'm going to keep this panel because it might be that I modify and I pick this back up and I redo this, so we'll see. But that's getting frogged. The other thing that's getting frogged is a sock. This is Malabrigo sock yarn in like a kind of funfetti kind of colourway, and I was knitting it with work.knits socks, yeah, fingering weight sock yarn in the colourway Almudine, which is the orange, and I was doing like a kind of slip stitch. This was really bizarre because I started knitting this and then Andrea Mari released her sock that's got the slip stitch vertical lines. It was so bizarre, it was such a coincidence. But anyway, why am I frogging this? I've got a nice little heel and turn in. It's actually a kind of garter stitch heel and turn, or like a reverse stockinette. These were going to be for my future mother-in-law, but they were so fiddly to make, I just really wasn't enjoying them. And I just don't think the size of them is going to be right. They're really quite big. So they're getting frogged, and I will use this yarn for socks, but just a different design. So on the frog pile. Okay, this next one is a shame to frog because I fully finished it, and I thought I'd really love it. This was, okay, how best to show this? This is a cowl, and it looks quite cute on camera. I am not putting it on because it's so hot. This is one of those cowls that you kind of make it as if it's a triangular shawl, but you keep it connected at the back. So you kind of use the shaping from a triangular shawl. You start off with a garter stitch tab. I just completely made this up. This was like a complete doodle. And I did little cabled sections, and I did ribbed sections, and I did half fisherman's rib sections. I did some mosaic knitting sections, all sorts. And it's very similar. My idea was I've knit the Nyx shawl by Moonstruck Designs. I'm struggling to remember her, Natasha Hornby. I really enjoyed that, but I made that into a cowl of this shape because I got to a certain point and I just thought, actually, I don't want to keep knitting this to a full shawl. So I made it into a cowl and I wear it all the time. And so I basically wanted to make another version, but instead of knitting it flat and then seaming it, I just wanted to knit it in the round. But I don't know, there's just something about this that didn't quite turn out the way I wanted it to. I think it's the flat yellow, just doesn't work for me. So that was a learning curve. There's not actually anything wrong with it, but I do really love the yarn. The yarn is Studio Donegal. I think it's like their Tweedy base. It's just gorgeous. It's so soft. Really plump, really gorgeous, soft, but kind of rustic. So I just think I could use it for something else. So I've never worn this, never gravitated towards wearing it. So I'm going to frog it, and I think I'm going to knit something for my future mother-in-law because she loves this mustard colour. And that will bring everyone more joy. But loads learnt from this, so not a problem. Okay, we're getting to the last few. This next thing that I'm going to frog is a really interesting one. This has been on the needles forever. This is based off the Strange Brew recipe pattern by Tin Can Knits. This is knit up, this orange is West Yorkshire Spinners Wensleydale Fleece DK. If anyone else likes this colour, please don't take offence from this, but I just really hate it. I love burnt orange, but in person it's just flat. It's flat, it's dense, it's monotone. The yarn is really crinkly even after blocking. It was not your eyes to use. It's really prickly. And then I thought I'd combine it with some like colour work around the middle and then transition to this. I like the idea. I like the textured yoke. It's got little ribbed panel like bands in it. I like the neckline, but I'm just not feeling it. And I've got another skein that I haven't even touched of the orange, and I think I'm going to destash it. So if anyone really loves it and loves a rustic yarn with a long staple and loves the colour, very, very happy to sell it to you for a highly discounted rate. But I just need to accept that I'm never going to knit this up. I don't think this yarn at the top here will be in a good state to cake up and sell. I mean, it's not like I've ruined it, but it's just been knit up for a really long time, so it's going to be very wiggly. But if someone wanted that quantity, I'm happy to. I'm going to be frogging it, so something's got to happen with it. So that's that. And then we're down to the last two or three, guys. This next one's a shame. This is also knitting machine knit. It's got a honeycomb texture. I don't know if you can see. The feel is gorgeous, the squish, but this texture uses up so much yarn. I could sew it together and make it into a big cowl. I could do that. That is an option. There is a stitch that the machine missed that I need to secure. I could sew this up into a cowl and it would be a lovely piece in my wardrobe, to be fair. I could do that rather than frog it, which would be a shame because the texture is so beautiful. I really don't think it's coming up on camera, but it's a really beautiful texture. So maybe I'd do that rather than frog it, but it just wasn't quite what I'd hoped for. I'd hoped it would be a big like wrap, but maybe we can frog and use it as a big cowl. Sorry, sew it up and use it as a big cowl and then secure that stitch. Maybe I do that. Okay, this conversation with myself, with you-ish, has really helped because I figured out I'm not going to frog that. There we go. Sorry, that's also knit in machine knit in Holst Garn, super soft in the colourway Ember. Next thing is also in Holst Garn. This is a tiny little fingerless mitt in a rib, 2x2 rib. I just really don't like purple. And I think I ordered this thinking it was a slightly different shade, and it wasn't. This is a just self-drafted fingerless mitt pattern. I don't really wear fingerless mitts. I was knitting them for my sister to wear so that she could wear them whilst driving, but I knit her some other ones instead, which I think I showed on this podcast earlier this year. They were navy and hot pink. So I might frog this and destash this as well. This is the colourway Slow. Really beautiful yarn, just not my shade, so maybe I'll destash that too, but I've actually got like a ball of it, not just this bit. And then the final one I was going to show you, which links back to the earlier project. This was my first attempt at a shift shawl. And as I said, I was modifying it by going down to fingering weight yarn, and that was probably half the problem. This is knit in a Crazy Zabba ball, and then also a skein of John Arbon sock yarn, like marled sock yarn, which I got a skein of when I became a mill member. But yeah, I like the greys and the pinks, but on camera it's coming out really purpley. I think that was one of the issues. I just didn't like the stripy look of it. It wasn't my thing, so that's getting frogged too, so that I can use that sock yarn for something else. I feel like I have just been talking solidly for an hour. It probably is about an hour. And I don't know if any of that made any sense. This is the kind of episode that previously I have stopped recording partway through, deleted the file and re-recorded, but I think it's good to touch base with you guys, and I need to be less of a perfectionist about this, and you're all so supportive and send me such lovely messages and are really cheering me on, and hopefully, and the impression I'm getting from you all is that you do feel like we're just sat talking in my living room, so to speak, or like we're talking over a cup of tea, and that's exactly the feeling that I want. And you can't go back and redo conversations in real life, and you can't go through and edit them. I now really do, I don't really edit my videos very much. Like, I don't take out bits that I've said, like raw content. I will just take out or re-record, like I redo bits if I can hear a train going past and I think there's no way they're going to hear me, or if I'm drinking loads, then I tend to try and edit that out. But I'm not, you know, editing whole swathes of speech. So yeah, I just need to be a bit more like, it is what it is. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the rambling today. I haven't really touched on pattern releases, and I have not been very organised about the, well no, that's not true. I have been quite organised about the regular giveaway. Before recording this podcast, I wasn't sure whether this is the week or not where I need to select a winner. If I do, it will be down below in the description box. We're obviously coming up on our 1,000 subscriber giveaway, which will have multiple different prizes. For a reminder of how to enter that, please see my last podcast episode where I touch on that. In terms of patterns, because I've got multiple in testing, there is the From Farm to City Shawl, which you can see on Ravelry. The pattern is not yet ready to be purchased, but you can give it a favourite or add it to your queue if you'd like to. That is a shawl with a cable down the middle, knit up in DK, and is meant to be like a really good throw-on piece that would be equally good for wearing, you know, in town for a nice chic look, or for a very like elegant country walk, whatever you fancy. That shawl, I have got multiple testers working on it. There are some edits that I need to make to the pattern. I was hoping to publish it this weekend, but the weather's been so hot here in the UK, I haven't been able to get pictures of me in like autumnal outfits. So I'll take a judgment call later today about whether or not I just go ahead and release it, but just with the pictures where it's like draped over a chair, or whether I think I really need to publish it with pictures of me wearing it. Let's just see, but that might be released today, so go and check out Ravelry. The other pattern I've got in testing is my cabled collar. Thank you so much to my wonderful tester for this, who's doing a fantastic job and is highlighting that I was definitely too tired when writing up my notes into a pattern for this, because there was quite a few errors on my part. So she has been fantastic, so thank you so much. If anyone else would like to test knit that cabled collar, which I talk about in my last episode, then please do let me know. I'm very, very happy for more people to test it. I'm looking to try and release the pattern in October, but it is a very quick knit, particularly once I've made some edits to the pattern that make more sense. So yeah, if you'd be interested in testing that, do let me know. It's worsted weight, you need 250 metres, and 4mm needles is what I knitted on, but it's very quick. So that's what's happening with patterns. I'm not going to give a life update this week. It has been a very, very busy week. You may, if you follow me on Instagram, I didn't just allude to that, I said that. I have therefore not been as active on Instagram as I was in the previous week when I did a little like day in the life of. Thank you for those who followed along. I think once I have a bit more of a concrete update, I will let you guys know and kind of share a bit more, but I think for the time being there's not much to share. So yeah, that's me. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am really looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time, when hopefully I've got some pictures of some finished baby knits, even if they're not here with me, and hopefully I've got at least one, if not two, George's sweaters done. So with that, bye for now, stay safe, happy knitting.